not a bad song to segue into this next reading, especially that last line. On this rock I stand, everything else is sinking sand. Because Peter, who you may or may not know, one of the disciples of Jesus, his name, Peter, the etymology behind it is related to the Greek word Petros, which means rock. And in this scripture we're going to read here, which is Matthew 16:13 through 20, Jesus is going to talk about a rock. And there are two interpretations of this. One of them is more rational than the other. Now, when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, butchered that name, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" They said, "Some say John the Baptist, but others Elijah, and still others say Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon, the son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you lose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he sternly ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. Peter went up to the roof of the house he was staying to pray. He became hungry and wanted something to eat. And while he was being prepared, he fell into trance. He saw the heaven open and something large like a sheet coming down, being lowered to the ground on its four corners. In it were all kinds of saying, "God, get up, Peter, kill and eat." But Peter said, "By no means, Lord, for I have never eaten anything that is profane or unclean." The voice said to him again, a second time, "What God has made clean, you must not call profane." This happened 3 times, and the thing was suddenly taken up to heaven. Now, while Peter was greatly puzzled about what to make of the vision that he had seen, suddenly the men sent by Cornelius appeared. They were asking for Simon the tanner's house, and were standing by the gate. They call out to ask whether Simon, who was called Peter, was staying there. You can see why I had trouble interpreting this.
My parents set very firm limits on how much television I could watch and when I could watch it when I was a kid. So I had to pick and choose what programs I thought were really worth lobbying for to try to convince my mom to let me watch them. And one program that I picked, particularly in the mid-'70s, was the Carol Burnett Show. And I think that it's classified as a variety show because it's got comedy skits and musical guests and a nice tight ensemble of actors, small group of actors to do their various skits. And Carol Burnett is the star, though as a middle schooler, junior high kid, I really liked Tim Conway. I didn't learn about Carol's backstory until much, much later, after the TV program was off the air. As a child, Carol actually did fairly well academically. She was admitted to UCLA and assumed that she wouldn't be able to go because of the costs, $50 tuition. She was raised in poverty by her grandmother, and they could barely afford the $30 for rent. So she was admitted to UCLA, assumed she wasn't going to go until one day she went to the apartment's mailbox and found an envelope addressed to her that had money in it for her to go to school. As of 3 years ago, she had not found out who had given her this money, and I assume that's still the case at this point. Her second big break came when a couple loaned her $1,000 while she was in school to move across the country to New York and to try to establish her career as an actress. The loan had 3 stipulations. First, she should never reveal the name of the benefactors. Second, she had to use the money to do this, to go to New York and to set herself up there. And third, if she became successful, she had to agree to help others out on their journeys. Well, after a rough start, Carol started getting some acting gigs and eventually got a big break, a starring role in Once Upon a Mattress. And then she got her TV program. And the rest, as they say, is history. Now, I bring all this up because I wonder what her 2 financial benefactors saw in young Carol Burnett. What did the first one see in this high school student that made that benefactor go, this kid is worth giving money to so she can go to college? And what did the second couple see in that college junior that said, this young woman is worth giving money to travel across the United States and to try to establish herself as an actress? They wanted to do this because they had been helped out when they arrived in the United States as immigrants and had agreed to pay that forward. And that's why they had that third stipulation that she pay it forward too if she got established. Well, I think something similar is going on in our gospel reading. Matthew uses the word Messiah several times in the gospel prior to this reading. But every time he uses the term, it's always on his lips. It's in his voice. It's the narrator saying Jesus is the Messiah. In other words, he's speaking to us. It's not a character in the story saying this about Jesus. It's Matthew telling us this. And presumably we know this already. We're reading his gospel. Well, here in chapter 16, a character says that Jesus is the Messiah. Simon, the son of a guy named Jonah, says to Jesus, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And Jesus gives him a new name, the Rock. You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. And from this moment forward, that's how the followers of Jesus knew him, as Simon the Rock, Simon Peter, or just Peter. I think that Jesus saw something in that moment, something not fully formed, yet somehow very real, something holy, something deeply connected to God. Jesus saw some potential in Simon, who he called Peter. You are the rock, Simon. This guy who just a few chapters ago leapt out of a boat to join Jesus walking on the water and sank. This guy who will go up on the mountain with Jesus and see him transfigured and thinks that the appropriate response is to build a couple huts, 3 huts, to capture the moment, I guess. This guy who will wonder aloud how much forgiveness is enough and who will wonder aloud what he, after having left everything to follow Jesus, is going to get out of it. This guy who will boldly declare to Jesus' face that he will never desert Jesus, and before the chapter finishes, denies even knowing him. This is the guy that Jesus sees as the rock. The rock that is a firm foundation for the church. Jesus must have seen potential that would not have been obvious to me. Now, it turns out, and no surprise here, that Jesus was right. Peter does come into his own. Something happens during the resurrection or soon after the resurrection. We see it in Pentecost when Jesus is the one who speaks to the crowd and gathers all kinds of folk to be part of the followers of Jesus. People gathered in Jerusalem for the festivities of Pentecost. And in today's reading in Acts, Peter draws the Jesus circle even wider, or he has the vision that pushes him to draw the Jesus circle even wider. Peter's vision that we heard described in today's reading takes place in a much bigger narrative. That's why I suggested Jacob go and actually read chapters 9 and 10, all of it, to see where this story falls in. Cornelius is a centurion in the Roman army, which makes him an enemy of the Jews. He's visited by an angel who directs him to send men to Joppa to seek out a man called Simon Peter, who is staying in the home of another guy named Simon, who's a tanner. While Cornelius is sending his men out to Joppa, Peter goes up on the roof of Simon the tanner's house to pray. And while he's up there, he has a vision. He sees a sheet coming down from heaven with all kinds of animals on it. And some of the animals are probably kosher, but some of them definitely are not. Even though the Torah forbids the eating of some of these animals, Peter hears a voice that tells him to go and kill them and eat them. You're hungry. Well, I can't do that, Peter says in the vision. I can't do that. Some of these animals are unclean. And the voice insists that he can eat anyway because God has made them clean. It's a weird vision. And Peter really doesn't make sense of it until he actually meets with Cornelius. The men who came looking for him on Cornelius' behalf bring Peter to Cornelius, and suddenly the dream makes sense, though Cornelius is part of the occupying Roman army, and in fact is the leader of 100 soldiers in the army. Peter realizes that he should not call him profane or unclean. Cornelius is to be welcomed into the community of Jesus. No matter who he was or where he was on his journey, he was welcome there. Now, we are a little bit more than halfway through our worship series, our Emerge worship series. The butterfly is unbound from the chrysalis and has emerged. The next step is for it to unfold its wings. This is a very vulnerable moment for the butterfly. It's no longer protected by the exoskeleton of the chrysalis, and it can't fly away yet because its wings are still folded up and damp. It's easy prey for a predator. And at the same time, this is a moment filled with possibilities. Once those wings are ready, that butterfly can fly off in any direction it wants to go. A moment filled with potential. We are, in our church's life cycle, at a moment of potential as well. I think this means we're also at a moment of vulnerability, but not vulnerable to a predator that's going to come and gobble us up. Our vulnerability is, I think, primarily to fear. Fear that we don't have enough, that we don't have enough power, prestige, or people, that we don't have enough energy or enthusiasm, that we don't have enough time, talent, or treasure. And there's a little bit of truth to that fear. We don't have enough to do everything we want to do. And that's because we are people with generous hearts. We're a congregation that easily identifies needs in our community, and we see how addressing those needs is a gospel call, is a way to fulfill the gospel of Jesus. And we can't do everything. What we can do is some things, and do them very well. We have an identity. We are a congregation united in God's love for everyone's journey, no exceptions. We have a mission. Following the example of Jesus, Niles Discovery Church welcomes all people, grows in our relationship with God and each other, and serves our neighbors near and far. What we need to do next is figure out what our focus is going to be to fulfill this mission. We need to determine with greater clarity what fulfilling that mission looks like at this moment in our life, in this moment in the world. Now, as you might have suspected, I have spent a fair amount of time thinking and praying about this. Occupational hazard, I guess. I've been looking at our passions and our resources, and here's the vision that's been developing in me. Welcoming all people is such an integral part of who we are that it's going to overlap with everything we do. We're a congregation that understands the message of Peter's vision, that all of God's creation is sacred, that every person in God's creation is sacred. If we decide we need to add anything to specifically address this part of our mission, my suspicion is that it's going to be some sort of a ministry of outreach and support to the LGBTQ community, but we'll see what happens with that. We already put significant resources into growing in our relationships with God and each other. On Sunday mornings, we spend time and energy and money and volunteerism in our worship of God, in our faith formation, and in our fellowship activities. I think we do these things well and should continue to do them, even looking for ways to expand them. And there are, of course, other times than Sunday mornings where we fulfill this part of our mission. Our Monday morning Bible studies, our lap robe tying group, our newly invigorated daytime fellowship program. The coming flea market is a fellowship activity too, in many ways. At some point in the next couple years, I hope that we add a new way of worshiping to what we do on Sunday mornings, something else, maybe some other time of the week, when more people can connect with us. But for now, I hope that we will focus on the things we're doing already and that we're doing really well. As I mentioned earlier, it's in the serving of our neighbors near and far that we end up spreading ourselves too thin. So we need to focus ourselves in fulfilling this part of our mission, I think at least. Focusing ourselves on how we'll fulfill this part of our mission will also help us, I think, stand out in this large, diverse community. Focusing ourselves on how we'll fulfill this part of our mission will essentially help us understand our niche and scratch it. The purpose of that focus, I propose that that focus be in two specific areas, on two specific issues: homelessness and the climate crisis. We have a vision of us, I have a vision of us being known as the Climate Justice and Housing Justice Church. There are many other things we can do, but this is where I think our focus needs to be, at least at this time in our life as a congregation. I pick these two areas because we already have invested time and energy and people power into expanding them, and we can continue to do so. I pick these two areas because I sense we already have a passion and are feeling an urgency about them. I pick these two areas because they are gospel work. I have a vision for our church, Niles Discovery Church, the Climate Justice and Housing Justice Church. That's what I see unfolding. What do you see unfolding?